18,000 coffee plants, dead. In a single week, the White House just terminated their exclusive contract. Stopped pouring his coffee, effective immediately, and the woman who poisoned them, she was standing 20 feet away, mouth open in disbelief. Due to the supplier's failure to deliver, the executive residence hereby cancels the Kona Hale Estate coffee contract. Signed by the social secretary. 2 Secret Service agents arrived. This was no longer a local dispute.
Mr. Hale, we need to secure the site. This is a potential national security incident.
National security. Over coffee. This is insane.
Insane. She doesn't even know. She killed the only coffee the White House drank for 12 years.
And she had no idea the true damage she'd done. Not yet. To understand how a quiet coffee farm became the center of a federal crisis, you have to rewind 3 months. 3 months earlier, Kenneth Hale's farm was a green cathedral. 40 acres of coffee, heavy with crimson cherries.
Another perfect season. The White House has never tasted anything like our Kona cherries.
12 years of contracts. Every president since the first Bush has started his morning with our coffee.
The Hale farm held the executive residence beverage contract through 4 administrations.
Every new social secretary tried to bring in cheaper beans. The coffee always won.
Your grandfather started with nothing but this land and a dream. Now we serve the White House.
He bought this land in 1971 for $8,000 cash. Best investment a man ever made.
William Hale had planted the first tree by hand. He used to say it was his first child.
That man's spirit is in every root, and now the most powerful person on earth drinks it.
And they believed it would last forever. The threat didn't come from Washington. It came from 8 miles east, inside a sterile community center.
This coffee operation is culturally inappropriate for a luxury residential community. It isn't the image we're cultivating.
Culturally inappropriate. My family has poured our lives into this soil since before she could spell Kona.
Notice of violation. Your agricultural use is deemed inconsistent with the Ridgeview Community Covenants, conditions, and restrictions.
We have standards, Mr. Hale. Your grandfather's little hobby farm doesn't belong next to $500,000 homes.
My farm was here 50 years before any of you bought your developer-grade kitchens. You bought next to a coffee plantation.
Times change. The board will be voting on this. I can tell you how it's going to go.
She isn't going to stop. This isn't about the rules. It's personal. She wants the land.
Every Tuesday, Carolyn drove past in her white SUV, cell phone raised, photographing any leaf that drifted across the lot line. And behind closed doors, she was already plotting something far worse than a few violation notices. 3 days after the HOA vote, Carolyn Bauer purchased a 5-gallon jug of industrial root killer at an agricultural depot. The clerk did not ask questions. Cash payment, no receipt.
This will take care of that eyesore once and for all.
That night, under a moonless sky, she walked to the irrigation pump. She unscrewed the cap and tipped the jug into the intake valve.
That ought to do it. No more invasive foreign plants in my neighborhood.
The poison flowed through the lateral lines, straight to the root zones of 18,000 plants. By dawn, the irrigation had delivered the herbicide to every tree on the property.
In a week, that eyesore will be brown and dead. The HOA will finally have its standards.
She had no idea her act of petty spite was about to detonate an international crisis and collapse the White House coffee supply. By day 4, the yellow spots had spread to every branch. The leaves curled like burnt paper.
We've had rust before, but nothing that moved this fast. This is something else.
He dug down to the root zone. The soil smelled bitter, unnatural.
I saw the trees this morning, Kenneth. They're not just sick, they're dying.
I know. I've never seen a pathogen work this aggressively. It's in the water.
He shut off the irrigation, but the damage was done. 200 trees wilted overnight. By the end of the week, half the plantation was a sea of brown stems.
This is our legacy, our children's future, and it's rotting in the ground.
Kenneth stood at the field's edge, watching his grandfather's trees crumble to dust, and the poison was still working. The worst was yet to come. From the air, the farm looked like a brown scar carved into the green hillside. Not one tree alive.
18,000 plants, dead in 10 days. This was deliberate. Leilani, someone attacked us.
Who would destroy a century of work? Who could hate us this much?
Kenneth called the top plant pathologist on the Big Island, a man who'd consulted for every coffee grower for 30 years. The pathologist took core samples from the root zones, 20 locations across the property, and his silence was terrifying. Finally, the expert spoke 4 words that turned the family's grief into rage: chemical kill, deliberate poison.
Poison. Someone put poison in my water. Someone on this island wanted to erase the Hale name.
Our contract, our savings, our children's future. All of it, gone, because of one person's spite.
The family stood in the wreckage, but Kenneth's mind was already racing. Who had access to the irrigation, and 3,000 miles away, a White House social secretary was about to pour her last cup of Kona coffee, not knowing the diplomatic catastrophe brewing. 3 weeks before the state dinner, Patricia Whitford's phone rang at 6 a.m. The pantry was empty.
What do you mean the shipment didn't go out? The president has Pacific Rim leaders in 3 weeks.
There won't be a shipment. My entire farm is dead. Someone poisoned our irrigation system.
Poisoned, Mr. Hale. This is not some small-town complaint. You signed an exclusive contract with the White House.
The social secretary's voice turned cold, the bureaucrat in her taking over.
If you cannot deliver, the executive office of the president will cancel your contract for non-performance.
12 years of perfect delivery, and one crop failure wipes it all away. She doesn't understand sabotage.
The termination letter was already being drafted, the same letter he would hold 3 weeks later, standing in a dead field.
The state dinner relies on that coffee. Without it, the entire summit's diplomatic rhythm is off. Do you understand?
Kenneth understood more than she knew, but he didn't yet know that coffee was about to become a national security threat. The state lab called 2 days later. The water sample showed a chemical signature of 2,4-D herbicide, industrial grade.
That's not just weed killer. That's the stuff they use to clear whole forests. Someone wanted my trees gone.
He checked the island's only agricultural supplier. A cash sale for root killer. No name, but security footage existed. The depot's camera captured a figure in dark clothing, but the face was obscured. Not enough.
But my farm has its own cameras. Every inch of the property. I'll find you.
Kenneth reviewed his own security tapes. At 2:47, mem, a figure walked to the irrigation pump, matching the night of the poisoning.
That's not a random vandal. That's someone who knew exactly where to pour. Deliberate sabotage.
The figure was careful. Head down, steps deliberate. The camera caught the glint of a plastic jug. The footage was grainy, but it proved intent. This was a premeditated attack, and whoever did it was about to learn that the poison had reached far beyond a coffee farm. A retired couple who lived near the farm saw a white luxury SUV parked on the road on the night of the poisoning.
White SUV. Magenta blouse. That's Carolyn. She was at the farm at 2:45 a.m.
The witness described a woman in bright clothing walking toward the irrigation intake, a heavy jug in her hands.
Carolyn, your neighbors saw your Range Rover at my irrigation pump that night. What were you doing there?
How dare you? I've never trespassed on your farm. Your witness is mistaken. If you repeat these lies, I'll have my lawyer end you before the week is out.
She's lying, but without hard proof, this room won't believe me.
The board members looked away. Nobody crossed Carolyn Bauer and kept their landscaping approval.
Face it, Kenneth. Your farm is dead. Maybe you should take the insurance and sell.
He left the meeting knowing he'd find the truth, but he still didn't know the full cost of what she'd done. 3 days after the HOA meeting, a black SUV with government plates turned down the farm road.
Mr. Hale, I am Agent Davis, Secret Service. Your coffee was the exclusive beverage for the White House. This is now a national security supply chain incident.
Secret Service. They're treating this like someone poisoned the president's own food supply.
Agent Davis explained that sabotaging food bound for the executive branch fell under the Critical Infrastructure Sabotage Statute.
I have lab reports and a neighbor's witness statement. I just couldn't make it stick in a local courtroom.
Leave that to us. We have subpoena power and a grand jury. This goes beyond property damage now.
Within hours, an EPA hazmat team was on the farm taking soil cores and water samples. The investigation had gone federal.
We're going to bring Carolyn Bauer in for questioning. We'll see how she handles federal investigators.
She thinks an HOA shield will protect her. She's about to find out it doesn't block the federal government.
But no one on the farm yet understood the true diplomatic cost. The state dinner was 3 weeks away. 2 days after the EPA team arrived, Patricia Whitford called with a classified briefing.
Kenneth, that state dinner? It's the centerpiece of a Pacific Trade Summit. Coffee tariffs. Your coffee was the diplomatic centerpiece.
Diplomatic centerpiece. She's saying my grandfather's coffee was a bargaining chip in international trade.
She emailed him the briefing book. The summit agenda listed coffee tariff liberalization as the top item, and his coffee as the official gift.
Every leader on the Pacific Rim was going to taste Kona Hale Estate. The agriculture attaché called it our secret weapon. Now we have nothing.
Mr. Hale, your cooperation is critical. We need to show this was deliberate sabotage, not a supply failure. Otherwise, our negotiating partners will see weakness.
This isn't just a contract. It's national security. The fate of trade deals hinges on my dead coffee plants.
Kenneth agreed to fully cooperate. The Secret Service would wire him for the next HOA meeting, hoping to catch Carolyn in a confession.
This farm just went from a local business to a federal case. I am not just fighting for us anymore.
And with that, the quiet coffee farmer became the key witness in a national security investigation. The following Monday, Kenneth was called to the U.S. Attorney's office. A federal prosecutor slid a grand jury subpoena across the table.
Mr. Hale, we've gathered the evidence. We need you to formally identify Carolyn Bauer as the saboteur.
Yes, absolutely. She's the one. The SUV, the jug, the timing, it all points to her.
Kenneth signed a sworn affidavit, listing every violation, every threat, and the moment the poison flowed through his land.
This affidavit, along with the lab reports and the witness statement, gives us enough for a federal grand jury.
She's going to prison over coffee plants and the White House.
The prosecutors prepared the indictment under the Critical Infrastructure Sabotage Statute, a charge usually reserved for attacks on power grids and water supplies.
Leilani, if they indict her, she'll fight dirty. She'll try to destroy our reputation.
But Kenneth had made his choice. He would testify, no matter the personal cost. That afternoon, a process server served Carolyn Bauer with a federal subpoena. Within hours of the subpoena, Carolyn Bauer hired a D.C. crisis lawyer whose first move was a press release calling Kenneth a disgruntled farmer with a personal grudge. Mr. Hale's claims are baseless harassment from a failed businessman. We will fully vindicate Mrs. Bauer's good name. Anonymous tips began feeding local blogs. Kenneth had a hidden gambling problem. His marriage was fragile. His coffee quality was overrated.
They're smearing my family's name so the jury doubts me before I even step into court.
Kenneth, they're trying to isolate you, but the truth is the truth. We have the lab reports, the witness, the affidavit.
That little coffee farmer is about to learn what a real legal team can do. I'll sue him for defamation when this is over.
The lawyer served subpoenas for every financial record Kenneth had. He was ready to dig through decades of tax history for a single mistake.
I've never missed a tax payment in my life. My grandfather kept ledgers that would make an auditor weep.
But the whispers on the island grew louder. Longtime neighbors started avoiding the farm road.
They want me to break, to withdraw my testimony. But I won't let her erase 100 years of Hale legacy.
Carolyn's lawyer filed a motion to dismiss, claiming the White House coffee contract was merely a ceremonial novelty and the coffee itself undistinguished.
They're attacking the coffee itself. If the jury believes it was ordinary, the poisoning won't seem like a national security crime.
Farm workers found their cars keyed overnight. Threatening notes warned them to stop working for the Hales. We have been retained to protect Mrs. Bauer's interests. Your testimony could expose you to legal liability if found inaccurate.
We've seen this intimidation before. The grand jury doesn't rely on a single witness. We have the lab reports, the footage, the affidavit.
They can threaten, they can smear, but they can't change what the soil samples prove. The poison is her signature.
The elderly witness called the U.S. Attorney's office, his voice shaking but clear. I saw her at 2:47 a.m. I am not lying.
The grand jury convenes next week. Once the indictment is unsealed, Carolyn Bauer's face will be on every screen in Hawaii.
But while the family waited for justice, another threat was growing. 3,000 miles away, on the floor of the United States Senate. Senator Daniel Kealoha had just read the grand jury filing, and he was furious enough to name names on the Senate floor. The senator's chief of staff called Kenneth at dawn. The senator wanted a briefing immediately.
Mr. Hale, I've read the grand jury summary. The coffee tariff negotiations are crumbling because of this sabotage. This is an outrage.
Kenneth flew to Honolulu that afternoon, meeting the senator in his Capitol office.
Your grandfather's coffee was the pride of Kona, and some HOA bureaucrat poisoned it for a view.
She called it culturally inappropriate. She doesn't understand what she's done to our country's trade position.
This goes beyond a property crime. It's an attack on the United States' economic diplomacy.
The senator stood, adjusting his print tie, his expression volcanic.
I am taking the floor tomorrow. I will name Carolyn Bauer and demand additional sanctions. The Senate needs to know this wasn't just vandalism.
Once he speaks, her name is attached to this forever. There's no turning back.
And with that, the quiet coffee farmer had a U.S. senator as his public champion. The confrontation was about to become a national headline. The grand jury returned its indictment at Wazan Kuji, Sharp. 2 counts: critical infrastructure sabotage and food supply contamination. An hour later, 4 Secret Service vehicles pulled up outside Carolyn Bauer's gated community.
Mrs. Bauer, you are under arrest for federal crimes against the United States. Please come with us.
This is absurd. I demand my lawyer. This is a vendetta by that farmer.
She was wearing a cream silk robe, her hair unwashed. The camera's already capturing the shock.
This can't be happening. I run this town.
Agent Davis cuffed her, reading the charges as she was led to the vehicle. The indictment alleged that she had knowingly contaminated a food supply intended for the executive branch. News vans broadcast live, but the full political explosion was still building. Senator Kealoha's speech was scheduled for noon. Kenneth watched the breaking news from his farmhouse, a grim satisfaction settling in his chest. At noon, Senator Daniel Kealoha rose on the Senate floor, the chamber silent. His voice carried the weight of a state betrayed.
I rise today to name a citizen whose actions have damaged the United States of America. Her name is Carolyn Bauer. She poisoned the coffee supply of the White House, collapsing a critical diplomatic lever just as we renegotiate Pacific Rim coffee tariffs. This was no prank. The State Department estimates $2.8 million in direct costs to reschedule a state dinner, but the cost in diplomatic credibility is incalculable.
The speech was carried live on every Hawaiian news channel, and soon national outlets picked up. The clip of her name being spoken would play 1,000 times.
I demand that the Department of Justice pursue every sanction, every avenue of restitution. Carolyn Bauer must face the full weight of federal law.
She's being held to account, not just for me, but for the whole country.
By evening, Carolyn Bauer's name was trending. The HOA Karen who poisoned the White House coffee supply became a national cautionary tale.
Let this be a warning. Sabotage against the institutions of our democracy will be met with the fury of this body.
The senator's speech was the final nail. Now the entire world knew what one woman's spite had cost. The morning after the senator's speech, every newspaper on the islands ran the same headline: Carolyn Bauer, the woman who poisoned the White House coffee. Every local news segment led with her mugshot. A split second of frozen shock repeated hourly. Talk radio callers flooded the lines calling her a domestic embarrassment, an enemy of the state. News helicopters circled the dead plantation, broadcasting aerial shots of the brown scar against the green hillside. Another front page. Her name in bold, the $2.8 million cost printed beneath her photo. For a full week, Carolyn Bauer's face was the most recognized scandal in Hawaii. Her name was a punchline, then a warning. Her lawyer tried to limit the damage, but the public had already convicted her in the court of opinion. The story went international. A petty HOA feud that cost the U.S. diplomatic ground in the Pacific. And through the chaos, the dead coffee rose stood still, a silent testament to what one woman's arrogance had wrought. The state dinner was scrubbed. Pacific Rim leaders arrived to an empty table, an American tea, not coffee. State Department internal memo. $2.8 million in lost deposits, rescheduled catering, and emergency diplomatic logistics.
Our gesture looked empty. We've lost face with the entire Pacific Rim.
We provided the evidence to the delegation, but the damage is done. They think we can't secure our own supply chain.
The handshake that was meant to seal a new coffee tariff accord never happened. The Japanese delegation left without a signed agreement. The State Department confirmed the final cost to taxpayers. Every element of that dinner had been double paid. Every room rebooked.
They're calling it the coffee gap in the press briefing room. I've never seen the Secretary of State so furious.
All because of one woman's desire to erase a Hawaiian coffee farm from her view. Her root killer had poisoned international relations. The dinner was eventually rescheduled, but the diplomatic damage was permanent. U.S. credibility had withered like the coffee plants. And the bill for Carolyn Bauer's spite had come due. $2.8 million, a stalled trade deal, and a nation's embarrassment. The federal trial lasted 4 days. The jury took 2 hours to return a guilty verdict on both counts. Carolyn Bauer's face went white as the foreman read the word guilty twice. Critical infrastructure sabotage, food supply contamination. At the sentencing hearing, the judge called her crime a deliberate attack on the nation's food supply chain that weakened a sovereign trade negotiation. Carolyn Bauer was sentenced to 6 years in a federal penitentiary, followed by 5 years of supervised release.
6 years for killing coffee trees. The real sentence is that her name will never escape what she did.
The court cited the $2.8 million cost and the irreparable harm to U.S. foreign policy as aggravating factors.
It was just some plants. I just wanted my view back.
She was led away in handcuffs, her magenta blouse replaced by prison orange. The courtroom gallery was silent.
Justice served. But it wouldn't bring back the trees.
The farm was still dead, but for the first time in months, Kenneth felt something like hope. A week after the verdict, the first shipment of new Kona saplings arrived. Kenneth knelt and pressed the first root into the soil.
Your grandfather started with a single tree. We'll start with 10,000.
They can kill the plants, but they can't kill the soul of this land.
The family and the farm workers who had stood by them, planted with hands still aching, rose stretching toward the horizon. 6 months later, the White House called again.
Kenneth, the White House wants to honor your cooperation. The Secretary of Agriculture has signed a commendation.
At a quiet ceremony in Honolulu, Kenneth received a certificate of appreciation for his service to the nation's food security.
A piece of paper won't replace what we lost, but it means they remember.
And then Patricia added the words he'd been waiting for. When your first harvest comes in, we want the coffee back. Kenneth looked out over the new green shoots, the sunset painting the hillside, and finally smiled. A year later, Kenneth walked the new rows at dawn, a cup of coffee in his hand. The presidential seal gleamed on the china. The steam rose, and he thought of the journey that brought him here.
From dead soil to the White House again. My grandfather would have wept.
The farm wasn't just restored. It was a monument to resilience. 6 years in prison for Carolyn Bauer couldn't bring back the lost trees. But the new roots had already taken the bitterness from the soil. The coffee would pour at the next state dinner. The trade deal would eventually be signed. The White House coffee was back, not because of luck, but because one farmer refused to let his grandfather's legacy die. Sometimes justice isn't a courtroom. It's a cup of coffee at dawn overlooking a field that refused to stay dead.
Here is to you, Grandpa. They didn't take what's ours.
A quiet end to a storm, and the coffee kept pouring.